Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live from Film Fanatic headquarters. It's been a few days since I've been able to do a video, and so excited to be back at it. It is 10:51 here on a Wednesday morning, so hope everyone's doing good. I had a pretty amazing concert going experience on Monday. I got to see my favorite band in the land, and that is Autechre. So I wanted to do a show talking about the whole day and the whole experience. And it was it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So I saw Autechre on Monday down at the Paradise Rock Club in Boston, Mass. It was my first time going to Boston. To not my first time going to Boston. My first time going to the Paradise. I had heard about this club over the years. It had like a kind of a legendary thing tied to it. Lots of really you know well known bands, real important bands have played there throughout the years. And but I had never been to this space. And so originally about probably it's hard to believe, but I bought tickets for the show about 7 months ago. Autechre has been my favorite group for many years, and technically it's not a band. They but I consider it to be a band. Anybody out there who doesn't know who Autechre is, they've been on Warp Records for since kind of their inception as a group. But I consider them a band. They've been on Warp Records, and they are one of the most. Well, I think in the world of electronic music, they're probably the most innovative and exciting thing that's ever graced graced our ears. And Warp Records is an amazing label out of the UK as well as Autechre. You know, really huge groups. Aphex Twin is probably the most well known. Thundercat, I do believe, put out a record through them. Square Pusher, Flying Lotus. I mean, just an amazing roster. And that label, Warp Records, kind of specializes in real eclectic electronica music. They've broadened their palette and the artists that they have to other styles of music, but primarily it's still a electronica. Another legendary band on the label is Boards of Canada, which I did a show on a few months ago. So I wanted to talk about the whole experience because it was such a moving experience. It was my second time getting a chance to see Autechre, and I've talked about that experience, and that was about 7 or 8 years ago. So, um, about 7 months ago, I saw it just randomly came across. The Autechre typically does not come to the states very often to tour, so it's been about 8 years, almost 7 or 8 years since they've been back to the states. The last 2 or 3 years, they have been really active as a band and playing. They went on some huge tours in Europe, for all throughout Europe, and they are. I honestly think, as just as far as a band or artists or a group of artists, I think they are the most like prolific artists out there. They put out so much music. They've been the last few years. They've been recording. They recorded all of their shows from their one big tour that they had about a year ago in Europe. They recorded all of their shows, and then they basically used all of those recordings as they turned them into live albums, and they've been releasing them. And they released it as this giant box set, and so there's like I don't know 13 hours of music. It's just like insane, and then they've been putting out remastered versions of some of their classic albums and older albums with all of these additional tracks. So unbelievable. So um, I came across this and I was just I was like super excited. Of course, super excited, and I was like, kind of came out of nowhere that they had announced Autechre was doing a massive tour where it was going to be starting off in Europe and then going throughout the United States. And this was like since I've been a fan, at least, of their music, this was like the biggest and most kind of ambitious tour that they've ever done. And I saw all the dates, and they were like going basically everywhere from New York to L.A. to Massachusetts to down south. You know, really extensive tour. And then the first leg of the tour was going to be in Europe. And so I was like really excited. So I instantly tried to find tickets. And I talked to someone, a friend at the time, who was interested, who loved their music as well, and they were on board. And I was like, we should get tickets. We got to get tickets. So I went and I looked around for tickets, and within days there was all of these shows that had been listed as being sold out already. It was just like it was wild. When I first saw them at Three Art Space, which is an amazing venue in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is a really tiny venue, but just an incredible venue. That's where I originally saw them. And I've talked about that being like the most, my favorite concert of all time in many other videos. I've done many shows on Autechre. I've covered their albums. I've talked about my live experience seeing them. I got the chance to actually spend time with them and hang out with them. So, pretty serious connection. And so I looked into that, like, because they were going to be back at Three Art Space, and that show sold out like in 10 minutes. It was crazy. And then I saw that all of these other dates were just selling out like crazy, and I'm like, wow. And I've noticed that the last few years they've always been very very popular, but not like I wouldn't say they are a household name by any means, but in their little niche, they're extremely extremely popular. But I noticed the last few years there was more and more people um, really grasping their music and checking it out and sharing their music, and more people talking about them just in general, like online and all of these things. They were just getting more and more traction in the last few years. And Warp Records, their label, really has a great marketing campaign for like when they release an album for one of their artists, and then also tours and shows. They do a really fantastic job with marketing. So I noticed that was all happening. That was all like kind of beefed up more, and all of this traction that was happening. And I saw like all of these dates were selling out. So it was just like it was wild. And during this whole time, I saw that, I kind of put it away for a while because I saw all the dates were selling out, and then I wasn't. It looked like I wasn't able to get a ticket for any shows that were kind of close by to Maine, and they had a couple of shows in Massachusetts, or one show in Massachusetts, and I can't remember the original venue that they were going to be at. All of the other shows, the Three Art Space again sold out quickly, and then there was one other show that was in Boston at a relatively small venue, and I happened to be searching, and I came across that, and then there was this updated news that the show had been moved to the Paradise, which is a bigger place. I think it holds like 900 people. Fairly big venue, but still pretty small and intimate. And there was this last minute update that they moved the show to a bigger space, the Paradise. And there were tickets available. There was like something like 20 or 30 tickets all of a sudden that were available, and I was able to buy two tickets, and I was like through the roof. I was super excited because it took a lot of work, a lot of finagling, and I was on the computer and on the phone for basically all day trying to figure it out and trying to figure out my options, and then that came up, and I was just like, oh. So the tickets were purchased, and again, this was like 7 months ago almost, which is crazy. So again, I've been, something to really look forward to, come, in the future, and so Monday was the show, and so I went down, and then so originally the first person who was going to go with me could not go, and then I had another friend who was going to go that I had asked, I don't know, maybe a month ago, and then they couldn't go. Something came up with work, and I was just like, man, okay. So then I asked another friend, and they were able to go, and they were totally set and psyched. So my friend Sam Whitick, who is an awesome, amazing drummer in the Mid Coast and really good friend. So he lives down in Portland. So the goal was I was going to drive down to Portland, and then he was gonna drive down to Boston. And so that was the plan. So I left my house. I went down to Portland, and I was probably about 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so from Portland, and I blew a tire on the highway. So that was pretty aggravating and stressful. And then that whole ordeal took about 2 hours to get fixed. Had to get towed. Had to get a new tire put on. The whole thing. That took about 2 hours. And then I got that situated, and then I went down to Portland. Made it to Portland, and we ended up having plenty of time. Luckily, I had started the day really early, so I gave myself plenty of time. And so then we drove down to Boston from Portland, and it was like a 2 hour drive. It wasn't that bad. And originally I was going to try to get a hotel down there, but then I was like, it's probably not that bad. It's probably not going to be that bad because the show is ending at 11, and it was really only a 2 hour drive from Portland. So it was like 4 hours altogether, which is not bad at all. So we scrapped any idea of getting a hotel. I had the option of staying at Sam's place, and I've been in that done that trek a lot before, and it's 4 hours isn't that bad. Like driving 4 hours and then driving back, it can be a little bit of a grind, but I was fine with it. And so, um, got down to Boston, found the club, we parked a car, and we found some parking that was basically right in front of the Paradise. It was pretty cool. I was really excited, and I was pumped. And we got down there about quarter to five, and the show, the gates doors opened at 7, and the opening acts were going to start at 7:45. So we had like plenty of time. So we basically got out and walked around Boston, and looked for a place to find some food and drink, and we did that, hung out there, and then about, I don't know, quarter after 7, we decided to start walking over to the club, and we went to the venue, and the and then we got to the venue, walked inside, and you know had some beers. We had some drinks before, got some food, went inside, had some more beers, and then the first act came out, and I didn't get the guy's name, but he was really interesting and really cool. It was like really, he went on about 7:45 exactly, and it was really interesting. It was all electronic music, obviously, but there was like this jungle drum and bass kind of vibe, definitely experimental. There was definitely like kind of this harsh noise vibe to it. Also, it was really cool, and he did this very cool kind of vocal. He had this very cool vocal element to his music, but it was a really cool way to kick things off. And yeah, I was digging it. It was cool. It was really unique. Um, it had this like almost Animal Collective vibe, and it had an Aphex Twin vibe, and then a weird kind of noise vibe to it. But it was cool. I liked it. And he played for this artist who I did not get his name. Played for about 30, probably about 35, 40 minutes. So it was a pretty sweet way to kick off the festivities. And then so next up, after this guy who I did not get his name, was Mark Broom, who played kind of like immediately after this first act. And Mark Broom played quite a while. He had a very long set, and his music was pretty cool. Like it was kind of breakbeat, like in the breakbeat style of electronic music. Definitely had a little bit of a jungle vibe, but it was definitely, and it had an Aphex Twin vibe, and it was definitely in the breakbeat kind of style. Like which was cool and pretty funky. Um, my only complaint of the night, looking back, the sound, and I will have to say the sound at the Paradise was awesome. Especially when Autechre came out, it was just absolutely incredible. And it's a really cool venue because it's, we had to stand for a long time. We were standing from 7 to about 11. There was no places to. It was all general admission, but from a vantage point thing, you could see the band on stage with no problem, and the sound is really great. So wherever you were, you could hear the music really really well, and there was a cool like little light show, and so that was really great. But my only complaint, I thought, really was Mark Broom was really cool, and I liked that breakbeat style. It had a very kind of '80s kind of vibe. I thought he did play a little too long. I thought he went on a little too long. His set was quite a bit longer than the first act. I love the length of the first act, but it felt like he played for like an hour and a half, which was like a little bit too long for an opening act. But and his style was very cool. I thought it got a little bit repetitious, but it was still cool, and it really he was playing more higher energy music, so it was kind of like revving up the crowd, kind of getting people loose. You could tell the alcohol was kicking in, so that was cool, and it was effective that way. And and then after Mark Broom's set concluded, right after the other thing that was really cool was all the music for the night was there was there was really no downtime. It was like everything segued into each other. It was really cool. So you were like constantly getting some kind of form of music, and it was all tied together really well, which I thought was awesome, and kept it exciting. So as soon as Mark Broom came to the conclusion of his set, these kind of red lights were turned on stage that were actually really cool, and this really kind of low level, quiet, beautiful, minimalist kind of ambient music came on, and it just went on for probably about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, and they had these flood kind of red lights, and this music was really cool, and it was like this. It felt like this kind of intro ambient music for Autechre set, but it just kind of set this vibe that was just like uh, really exciting and built. You felt like things are really being revved up, or at this point, and that you felt like you were going to see something special. And so this music was playing, and then you could see Autechre came out on stage, and there was like a huge, round of applause, and they came out on stage, and they after after they appeared, all of the lights in the venue turned off. And when I saw them 8 years ago, and it's something that they do, I guess, for all of their concerts. They play in total darkness. Whatever venue they're playing in is they kill all the lights, and it's super effective. It's very psychedelic, and it's super trippy, and it really creates this vibe, this atmosphere. So as soon as the lights went down, they started playing, and they started off playing this more kind of ambient synth stuff. And then within about 5 or 10 minutes, there was this really cool build up. Within 5 or 10 minutes, they were off to the they were out like fucking all guns blazing. They played this whole set. They played for about an hour and a half of this really intense jungle style of music, drum and bass, like really hyper kinetic, really rhythmically complex um, stuff that was just I don't know, a wonder to behold. That's the only way I can kind of describe it. And the way they kind of segued into their set was just amazing. And each artist was so different from each other, which was really great. It was all electronic music, but it really, it was very different. and the build up, the way it just everything kind of built up, and the segue to ultimately seeing Autechre was awesome. And once they kicked in, it was just like it was so it was so intense. They played this totally super intense jungle style drum and bass. They had that whole vibe kind of just going the whole time with all of these different ebbs and flows that were just mind blowing. And as much as I've said, and I more or less still believe it, but like, when people ask you, like, what are the top 10 or top 20 or your top concert, like, what's the best concert experience you've ever had?
Powering.
And I've talked a lot about the first time seeing Autechre about 8 years ago being the most, my favorite concert of all time, the most kind of just transcendent kind of feeling, transcendent experience when it comes to seeing live music. But there were some things that happened on Monday, the way I reacted that were I did not see coming, and I was really taken aback. It was way more emotional than I thought, and in some ways, this show was even more powerful for a lot of reasons that I'll explain. And it was hard to put into words. Really hard to put into words. Um, so when the lights went at the show and they started playing, you know, took always when you play in darkness or you're in a dark room or dark space, it takes you a while to kind of for your eyes to adjust. But there was so much. The light was there was no light at all in this venue that it felt like it took longer to kind of adjust to that, and you couldn't see anything. Like, you couldn't see an inch in front of your face, and the venue was sold out, the Paradise was sold out, everybody was packed in there, and but you couldn't see anything. You couldn't see anyone's face. um you couldn't really tell where you were, if you were, you know you could see the stage. The only light you could see was the light off of their equipment on stage, Autechre's equipment. You could see this blue kind of glow coming off of them, but that was it. So it's a really wild, kind of intense, but yet like relaxing space to be in to see music. Really unique, and it creates this thing. And it's really interesting now because a lot of bands that tour put a lot of work into the production of the show. Lots of LED lights, big, video screens, and all kinds of things, all the bells and whistles going off, which is cool. I'm a fan of shows when it's a show, like an experience. But a lot of bands typically have that kind of package when they perform. And some groups do it obviously more than others, but there's this high kind of production value. And it's so interesting to me that Autechre doesn't do that at all. All they do is just turn off all the lights, and to me, it's like almost more effective than something where it's all the bells and whistles, because it's kind of this. It puts you in this very, like, I don't know, like primal state, and but yet it's so simple, and it's like there's no tech involved. You're just shutting something off, basically. So so within about so they started playing, and and it was already incredible. And once the music started getting super intense, I I felt myself getting more and more lost in the music. And then I started getting this really um like kind of a disorientation, but then I started feeling like I was getting drawn into the music more and more, and I was like starting to forget, literally, and kind of this literal sense, uh, kind of starting to forget where I was, like what city I was in or where I was to see this music. It was like I just, like, everything kind of fell away, and all it was this music and this, like, emotion. but everything fell away. I didn't know where I was. The other thing that was so wild and weird, and again, I wasn't on any drugs. This experience sounds like I was on mushrooms or something. We drank quite a few beers, and I definitely had a buzz on, but I wasn't drunk. The first time I saw Autechre, I was shit faced drunk. I got totally trashed. This time I wasn't though. I kind of didn't want to get too drunk. I wanted to just kind of take in the music, and I was like, and then I didn't want to drink too much because then I'd have to piss and like, so I didn't want to have to deal with it. I just wanted to get enough so I had a nice buzz and just be able to chill and just kind of like absorb the thing, enjoy the real experience. So I this kind of sensation was happening, and then I started feeling like again, I for a bunch of time, and I lost track of time. I forgot where I was. Didn't really know where I was. I just knew that this music was coming through this incredible sound system. The sound system was amazing. The music was just absolutely incredible. Um, and everything just fell away. It was just like, well, it's like stripped down. It was just this immediate kind of in the moment thing that was happening. It was super intense. And there were all these moments that started happening of where I felt like we like that the show or this experience was taking place like outside, and the ceiling of the paradise, there's these little like lights on the top of the ceiling. And when I was starting to have these feelings, and all of these lights were turned off, but there was a little bit of a glimmer of those lights still on. They weren't turned completely off. They were just dialed all the way down. And I was getting this feeling that like suddenly I felt like the show was taking place outside on this green grassy kind of field in the mountains, and you could see, and if I looked up you could see the stars. That's what it felt like. And it was really, it was wild. It was like this wild sensation because at that point I felt like I was like getting into this space, or like in this uncharted, I was in this uncharted territory. And I had this sensation that this was outside, in this, kind of like when you walk outside in your yard during the summer, and if you happen to be in an area where there's no like light pollution, and it's just natural light, you can see every star, and it's like a wondrous and beautiful. That was the feeling I was getting. Like I felt like I was in that kind of setting. And so everything was like, I felt like everything was falling away. And so I was getting that sensation. And then about, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so, about 10 minutes or so into their set, I felt myself getting so emotional. And I still had that sensation of disorientation, but like good disorientation, if that makes sense, where I just didn't know really where I was, and I didn't care where I was. I was just like, just, I felt myself being drawn into this whole thing more and more. So again, like as the show was starting and Autechre took the stage, there were these red lights. They had this ambient music that was really soothing and relaxing. I had this experience of feeling, and once they kicked in, it was just like balls to the wall intensity, and I had this like transcending feeling of not knowing where I was. This feeling of where I felt all of that stuff was kind of falling away, and it was just like this really focused kind of crystallized thing that was happening on the music and just the kind of the environment, and this feeling of being outside, where I could see the stars in this field, on this mountainous area, um, and and about and then within about 5 or 10 minutes of this, I felt like I was like being so drawn in to what was happening. Um, I actually started to cry. I actually started crying, and at first I was like, "Oh my God, I can't do this. I don't want to start crying in public because I'm getting too emotional with this experience." And I was trying to fight it. I was trying to fight this feeling of this emotion that was coming over me, and this like, and I'm one too as a person. Like, I don't usually ever cry in public or have that kind of outburst. I've always been pretty self conscious of that kind of thing, especially if it's in a public setting. And I started to cry, and I was kind of like, my immediate reaction was, "Oh, I got to stop. I can't do this." And people are going to know, and there's like all these people around. People are going to see. But then I realized, and it was such a strange kind of like revelation, that like no one can see me. I'm in total darkness. I can't see, an inch in front of my face. I have this disorientation, but it feels really good. I don't really know where I am, and I kind of don't care. And I came to this realization that like nobody can see me, and it felt like, because of the darkness, it kind of felt like this feeling of like where it was like a private experience. And when during when all of these emotions were happening, and when I started to cry, and I, you know, realized that like, oh, wow, like I I'm in a place right now where literally nobody can see me or hear me, and so it's okay. So I found myself with this feeling of just wanting to just uh, where everything was falling away, and I surrendered to that feeling. So I felt like everything was stripped down, everything was being stripped away, and I realized no one can see me in this state. And when I kind of came to that conclusion while it was happening, and this happened about, again, like about maybe 15 minutes or so into their set, the start of their set, when I realized, okay, I feel like I'm in this safe space, if you will, I just decided to totally surrender to what I was feeling in that moment. And I just kind of let it go. And I, at that point, I just let everything go, and I totally got lost in that moment and the experience. And I started to cry even more. And to the point of where I was just like full on sobbing right there at the show. And I've never had that experience ever for a concert. I've never had that experience in public. But because of the situation, I just totally decided to surrender to everything that I was experiencing, and I just felt like I'm gonna try to just coast and be in this moment right now, because this is like something unique, something I did not expect. And we all have this experience where music is art in general. It is it's such a powerful instrument. On one hand, it's like it's about entertainment and escapism, but then it's also this instrument to kind of like really cathartically kind of deal with emotions on a deep level. And I felt like that's what this was, and so I totally surrendered to this feeling and all of these feelings, and I found myself crying even more. And I was like just completely lost in this experience, but it never felt like scary or um, depressing. It was it was just this experience. And as this was happening, I started getting this visual thing started happening and kind of appearing. And I know this sounds super strange and weird and sounds like maybe I was taking acid or on mushrooms, but I was totally sober. By the time Autechre had come out, again, like I said, I had been drinking with, you know, we had about, I don't know, maybe 4 to 5 drinks. So I had a good buzz on. But actually, by the time they came out, I wasn't drunk, but I had a good buzz on. But by the time they came out, and as this experience was happening, I felt like I had sobered up. I I didn't want to drink a lot because I wanted to kind of experience this, the music for what it was. And then the main thing was I didn't want to have to pee every 5 minutes. So kind of funny, but so as um, all of these emotions were washing over me, and I proceeded to just cry more and more, and I just decided to just surrender it. I had this feeling of just total, just surrendering to whatever was happening to me. I started getting this visual thing started happening, and very hard to describe, but it was like, if you look at, like, say, I was describing this to a friend the other day, and I told someone, a friend, about this experience, and I haven't shared this with anyone else, but this visual thing started happening, and it was kind of like the way I was describing it, or the best way I kind of articulate it, was kind of like a Rolodex, where you have this Rolodex in front of you. And another thing I thought about was kind of like flashcards. And I had all of these images that, at first, all of these images, like, it was like they looked like pictures of these things that I've experienced the last, you know, 5 years or so. Mostly things dealing with some really horrible things that I went through personally during COVID, during lockdown. And I was getting these, like, images or like snapshots, and it was like kind of in this like Rolodex thing, kind of setting, and I was getting these visuals of these like really horrible experiences that I had had, and was like, I felt like I was facing these things, um, dead on. And and for me, it's like Autechre. Again, I've been into their music, and to kind of explain that reaction, or this experience, the best way to is to kind of talk about my tie to Autechre as a band. I mean, not only I'm just a huge fan. I just love their music to death, and electronic music is my favorite style. And for me, I've always felt like, after listening to them for so long, and getting to a place with, like, just being such a huge fan, I've described Autechre in certain ways to people, like, like, you say folk, like, you take a genre like, say, folk music, you know, and kind of the most iconic figure in, say, that style. Uh, you could say easily is, like, say, Bob Dylan. It's like what Bob Dylan is to folk music. And then you could take jazz music, for instance. It's kind of like, I feel like it's like, Miles Davis. It's like the Miles Davis kind of represents that. He's like the apex of that. And I feel like when it comes to Autechre and the world of electronic music, I feel like Autechre is equivalent to Miles Davis or Bob Dylan. That's usually how I explain it. And so I always had a deep connection to their music. And then when I got to see them 8 years ago, having that incredible experience of like getting to hang out with them and spend, a few hours with them, 3 to 4 hours, and having that experience of, where it was just amazing and my mind was blown on just how cool these guys were, and super down to earth, disarming, just really cool. And it was like amazing. It was amazing. To me, it gave me this deeper kind of tie to their music in a lot of ways. And the big thing for me, or the biggest experience that I have personally around their music, as to why, not only is it just their music is incredibly entertaining and fun and challenging, but on a real deep level, why I feel there is this deepness. Um, During COVID, and I've talked about this on my channel, and I kind of, I try not to divulge too much personal things, but these things are very important to me, and I feel like they are who I am. So, and this whole channel is a passion project for me. It's something I love. It's something I'm kind of obsessed with. It's just who I am. So it's okay to talk about some of these things to a degree. And so during COVID, and I've talked about the experiences that I had during COVID, which were truly frightening, truly horrific, truly horrible. Um, I've experienced ups and downs in my life before. Sometimes very, very bad. I've dealt with extreme depression before, and had seek counseling, and I've gone through some things that were really, really tough, but somewhat, normal things that people go through, I would say. And but my experience during COVID, especially during the lockdown that year, and that year and a half where we were confined to our house and to our space, to where we couldn't interact with people, that experience itself was uh, the hardest thing I've ever had to go through in my entire life. Um, I literally did not think I was going to survive. I literally did not think I would. I felt like at one point it was so bad that I was really close. It never happened, thankfully, and I never had thoughts of that, but I literally thought I was going to like lose my will to live. And coming to terms with that, where everything was gone, everything that I enjoyed, everything that I was passionate about, everything that made me laugh, everything that inspired me was gone. Um, and I became so isolated as a person that um, it was hard. I couldn't get out of bed. It was hard just existing. Nothing was helping. And the scariest part of that, I eventually did get help, and it did help tremendously. Um, the hardest parts of that experience was the extreme sense of paranoia that I went through as a person. I started getting, I was going through these phases of extreme paranoia where I felt like anything and everything could kill me. And then I was just in like pure survival mode, literally. Um, I had this, and the two hardest experiences too were I felt like I got to a place of where I couldn't play music. I was in a few bands at that time. I had to quit them because some of those bands were still kind of continuing and trying to perform gigs and do their thing. I couldn't do it. And so I quit some groups, a couple of different groups, and I could not bring myself to that. And then the hardest part was coming to terms, because I couldn't even play my instrument or even be around music anymore for months, almost a year of that. And that was the scariest part, was that I was like I couldn't even um, was that I would wake up one day and I couldn't play music anymore. And also, in my family, there is a little bit of a history of mental illness. Um, two family members, two close family members in my family were institutionalized. And I felt, and I know there's like a biological link to mental illness, and I felt this was that happening, and I felt like I reached a point where I was going to either have to be um, totally hospitalized, like have to be put into a mental hospital or an institution, or I was going to kill myself. Like that's what I thought those were my two choices at one point. So, and the thought of that was terrifying. And at one point I started hearing, um, I started getting these really bad hallucinations as well, like hearing voices at one point and seeing colors and not knowing where I was at any given moment. Everything was so disorienting. I literally thought I was losing my mind. I eventually did get help, and but I went through this period where I did not see anyone or even talk to anyone for an insane amount of time. I I had to also move in with my parents. I had to move back. My parents live right down the street from me, and I had to move in with them. I had to move back into the house because I could not be here by myself. Couldn't. Speaking of movies, I couldn't even watch movies. Horror movies, everything like scared me. My my favorite kinds of films I couldn't watch because they would bother me and freak me out, and I couldn't watch horror films either. So everything was nothing was helping, nothing was working. So I ended up moving back with my parents. I wasn't working. Um, I eventually did start working again over a period of time at home, but I had to do that. And there was this time where I was literally not leaving the house, and there was a point where things were getting a little bit better, and there was a little bit of a shift, and I was feeling like there was a little bit of hope, and I did get some counseling. I did start talking to a professional, and that I literally think that saved my life. So, and I remember one day things were a little bit better. My parents, my mom had this idea that we should all just go out, and we hadn't done it in probably a year and a half, and we should just go somewhere. And they had the idea like they should take me to Bull Moose Music, my favorite place that I've talked about. So, and I was excited to do that, and I said, yeah, let's do it. And the one thing was that I was really excited about was that Autechre had just put out this double album, Sign, and it was a double album, and it had just come out, and so my goal was to go there and try to buy some movies, and then buy these two Autechre albums. That was like my thing. So I went. We went to Blue Moose, and they had both of these brand new albums, CDs that I bought of this new Autechre double album set, and I bought them. And I remember that day, and it was felt really great to be out, and feel like somewhat of a human being, and to kind of like do kind of normal things like what kind of normal people do. Um, and so, but it was a struggle. It was really a struggle. I remember on the way there, I used to get these anxiety attacks of where I would shake and I couldn't like sit still, and um, and I started getting those panic attacks on the way to Bull Moose, but it kind of subsided after a while. I was able to somewhat deal with it and I got through it. And so we we came back, we came home from Bull Moose, and the thing that I wanted to do was, which I was super excited about, was to go and listen to both of these Autechre albums because I needed to listen to them. And it was a summer day, and so what I ended up doing was I ended up getting into my car, took both of these brand new Autechre albums, these CDs, and where I live here in Northport, it's a beautiful, um, beach area. There's all these beautiful beaches here, and it's just a gorgeous spot where I live in. And there's all these little spots that you can go swimming and all of these things. So I what I did was I found the spot by the water that is my favorite spot, and I remember pulling my car there, and I turned down, lowered all the windows, and I listened to both of these Autechre albums back to back, and I just sat there by the water with my windows open, and I had a different car back then that had a really good stereo system, and so I proceeded to just listen to both albums back to back, and it was one of the greatest experiences I ever had while listening to music. So, getting back to this visual thing that I was experiencing, I was getting these images of all of these, and again, it was like these were like more like photos of these, or snapshots in certain periods of time of some really horrible things that I experienced during COVID. The one thing I will say during this whole time was that I took solace in realizing that my experience wasn't necessarily isolated. It was like a thing that collectively there were a lot of people that were affected by this, and that I was like somewhat comforted into realizing that I'm not the only person experiencing these things. Some people had it worse than others, but I realized I'm not alone, at least feeling these emotions. So that was helpful when I kind of realized that and came to that kind of conclusion. So I I when this whole visual thing started happening, I was getting these like snapshots, and it was kind of like on this Rolodex thing, and I could see it. I could almost see these snapshots of these specific situations of all of these horrible things that I was experiencing during COVID. And I remember like looking at some of these pictures, if you will, of this horrible trauma, like kind of dead on. And yet I had, and then while that was happening, and like kind of seeing these visuals while the music is going, and while I'm just totally lost in this moment, and I'm crying, and I was there with my eyes closed, I was seeing these snapshots, like it felt like it was clear as day, of all of these traumatic things that I experienced. And I had this sense of pure comfort and feeling of that it's going to be okay, and things will be okay. You will survive this. You will be okay. And I felt this overwhelming sense of that, like, I'm going to be okay, and I needed to face these things. And I had also these additional images of things, of beautiful snapshots, things that I really love and things that I cherish. And I just continually got this sensation that everything will be okay. And I felt comforted like a big giant warm blanket with like a hot cup of tea. Um, and I was totally surrendered to this experience. And I kind of realized that like all of these tears and all of this crying that I was experiencing, I never felt at all during that whole experience that these tears were from sadness or from hopelessness or depression. It felt like these were kind of tears of that were needed, and that they were um, it was actually a very cathartic, positive experience. And I really felt like I was facing certain things in that moment that I've never faced before. And this, again, this overwhelming feeling that it's going to be okay. Um, and I never felt in this experience that these tears that I was having were from a negative place. It was all from like this joyous thing. And I felt like I was totally like the other feeling that I have during this whacked out experience was that I was like kind of I felt like I was dumping all of this garbage that I had in my body. Like I was getting all of this garbage out. And it was just like leaving my body. Like I could feel all of this like crap and garbage and shit and just like all this shit that I've been feeling. I felt like it was like being kind of sucked out of me. It was really weird. It was so strange. While I was like seeing these images that I swear were like clear as day, and being so lost in the music. And I just felt like almost like a feeling of like a vacuum where you're sucking things out. And it felt like that's what was happening to all of the feeling of all of this garbage and things that I've been dealing with. And again, a lot of these things were not just COVID, they were lots of other things, and it wasn't all only horrific and sad images. They were also the first part was mostly these images that were tied to traumatic things that happened during COVID, and the other images that I saw were things that I really love. Places that I love to see, people that I care about, all positive things. So it wasn't all just that. And I remember just being so lost in this experience, and I never really had that where I just totally surrendered to the moment. Even though I felt like I was in uncharted territory and I didn't know what to say or do, I just kind of, it didn't matter. I was just like surrendering to it all. And eventually it all kind of subsided. I stopped crying. I eventually kind of regulated myself, and I just kind of came down. And it's hard to tell like how long this whole thing was going on. It felt like this whole experience lasted like maybe an hour or so, but it was hard to tell. And I wasn't keeping track of time. But it felt like with after an hour of this really intense experience, it started to kind of slowly subside. And I stopped crying, and then I eventually kind of came down or came back, and then I just kind of sat there calmly and kind of became myself again, and just went back to listening to the music and the concert. And then Autechre played this, completely. They played this very aggressive set, and but they also mixed things up quite a bit. Um, Rhythmically, just mind blowing, and they had lots of ebb and flow, but lots of ambient elements. And towards the end of the set, they brought things down quite a bit, and it got into more of a chilled space. Um, and the intensity of their music, even at the height, was so intense. It was like so extreme, kind of in its nature, that it was like almost had this other effect of where it was so extreme and intense and loud that it was like soothing and relaxing, like a warm bath. Even given even with the music and the whole thing just being so intense. And when so I after everything came down for me, feeling this way, everything kind of like I just was back to where I was. I felt pretty like normal, and I just remembered just enjoying the show, just enjoying the concert. And they played for probably an hour and 40 minutes or so. They played a nice long set, which was great, just this continuous set. And right at 11 o'clock, they stopped. And I remember just being so tired and exhausted, but just feeling so elated because the night before I had only slept a few hours too. So that obviously had something to do with this experience. I hadn't really been sleeping very well. So, and then we got in our car and drove home. So, yeah, I just wanted to share what my experience was like to see Autechre a second time. So thanks again, and peace.